Hi. Right. Let's start because I'm sure people will be joining us, but we have so much to cover today. It's a really, really great day today. We are expanding the collaboration of the Generative AI Security Project across the globe. A little bit about what I do and why we're here. I'm a board director for the Generative AI Security Project, and I lead the Agentic Security Initiative. You probably know our project from the top 10 for LLM. That has been a viral standard. We started the Agentic Security Initiative back in January. We will take you through the call today, all that. And today we want to announce, to kick off the public consultation of the top 10. We're not releasing the top 10 for agentic applications today, just the kind of the beginning. I thought communities can start talking both on digitally and also in the place where they work. So that's why we thought we'll organize local events. Many thanks to the London chapter for helping us and supporting us. We are live streaming this as well on the web. I'm also joined today by part of my distinguished expert review board. What we have done in our initiative is we want to bring community at scale and expertise together. So we've invited some very, very clever people known in the industry to join us and help us progress the agentic security. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dan. I am a researcher in Microsoft's AI Red team. And what we do is try and think about, well, we work with the sort of pen testing side, the operations of analyzing and trying to draw out risks from foundation models and new AI features. And as part of the research team, we try to look a bit further ahead and see what emerging threats are coming in the period ahead, probably like 3 months, which in our field is like, a lot of time, right? Because things are moving very quickly. So yeah, that's me and that's what I do.
Hey folks, my name is Josh. I run an AI security team at the Alan Turing Institute. We're primarily doing research looking at things that aren't LLMs, but we're spending quite a lot of time at the moment looking at how we can apply kind of traditional security approaches to basically AI as general, and as well working with quite a few government partners on kind of deployed things.
Hi everyone, I'm Vas Mavridis. I'm also from the Turing. I lead their team on autonomous cyber defense. What's interesting is that we're using agents to defend systems, but the moment you introduce an agent, even as a defender, you start wondering about its security. So it's kind of a circular argument there.
You guys need to have the microphone karaoke distance because otherwise people cannot hear you. Right, many thanks for joining. So today we're talking about agentic security. We're talking about the new top 10 coming. Can I ask you with a kind of rise of hands, how many of you have used or developed agents or you've been involved in agentic AI at all? Any of you? Oh, that's a very good kind of show of hands. And how many of you have come across the top 10 for LLMs and the Generative AI Security Project? A very good show of hands too. Okay, so then we're familiar with the topic. So today we're talking about agentic AI. It changes everything because it isn't just a chatbot that generates text that you read and you decide what to do. It starts driving all kind of tools. It makes decisions not based on what you have predefined in code, but it's autonomously based on what the underlying model, and that creates all kind of threats, all kind of questions for us to discuss. And so my first question for my panel is, what is that keeps you, what's the kind of the state of agentic security? What is that the top item that concerns you and preoccupies you about agentic security?
Okay, I think at first it's firstly the fact that the field's moving very quickly, right? Like the new applications are growing like by the day, and so I think that one of the most important things for me is that whenever you have your security risks, which are sort of traditional security risks, but when you bring AI into the equation, the AI enhanced part of the agentic system brings in, I guess, like we can say, softer risks that may magnify the security risks. An example is where agents might kind of make some tool calls. Those tool calls might tend to, other tool calls that are working on sensitive topics and might need to take some sensitive actions that are quite critical. And oftentimes, even sort of as Vaz just said, that the systems might have in place something to defend them, like as a human in the loop triggering. But these are sometimes probabilistic too. And so I think the probabilistic nature that AI inserted into these systems becomes a problem. Obviously, you want to keep things as deterministic as possible when you're talking about security. And so I think this is something that I would, I think is sort of front and foremost in my mind. I'm hopeful of certain research topics that exist at the moment, and in terms of trying to capture the context of like where the data is coming from and how it's fed into the model. And if it's sensitive, just don't use it. Just create a policy where you don't actually include it in the model during runtime. And I think these are sort of maybe some sort of simple ways to go about things. I'd also say, and we're seeing this a lot from my team in Microsoft, but our AI red team's having a lot more conversations with the red team, the classical security red team itself, because whenever there are threats that are raised, we, from the security standpoint, we can find subtleties about like where they might go wrong still. When you're including a model, there are different ways that you can actually feed, kind of get around some safeguards maybe, and use the probabilistic nature of the models to overwhelm that. So I would also love to see, similar to what we're doing here today, right? Building a community and opening up the conversation, to see red teams, classical security, talking to AI security, and because there are three different types of researchers really. There's AI research, there's security research, and then there's AI security research. And I think all three of those mean different things. And so I think making sure we're all in the room is important.
Stolen some of my thunder there slightly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree. No. I think the thing that I guess the thing that kind of keeps me up the most is we've been doing security for a long time before AI, and I think some people forget that we should, or we have a lot of kind of knowledge out there within orgs that we already have that can help us secure these AI systems. And one of the big things we're doing in my team is we're really trying to look at trying to identify what's actually different. And it's taking us quite a long time to look at all the kind of different research that's out there, and actually try and identify which part of this problem is actually unique to the fact that it's got AI in it. So a big example, which I like dunking on quite a lot, is data poisoning. Like a lot of the scenarios of data poisoning can be solved by access control. Like, don't let people arbitrarily put data into something. Or similarly, if you're going to pull things from the internet, you should treat it exactly the same as a normal piece of software. Like, you're not going to run a piece of software you've just downloaded off the internet. So not trying to remember and then repurpose kind of approaches we already have. I think similarly to Dan, I think I'm quite a good example, and my team's quite a good example, where I've come from a vulnerability research background, and I've got mathematicians on my team, I've got AI people on my team. And I think if you can kind of blend those kind of skills together, you end up with quite an interesting mix of kind of thoughts and also different kind of ways of kind of circumventing and coming up with mitigations, which I think is really, really powerful.
Great. Well, I have to say that nothing keeps me up at night. I sleep really well. But there are a couple of things I find interesting. So the first one is that I think for the first time we have to do black box audits, in the sense that, sure, you buy, I don't know, you buy an HSM from a vendor, you know they're doing their audits internally where they have access to everything. You may want to do a black box audit yourself too on top of it, fine. But I think for the first time we have now a neural network that no one can reliably tell you what every weight or every learned parameter stands for. So I think that's new. So I agree with Josh's point that while we have all this security audit expertise and ways of doing things, I see this as being slightly different. But again, black box audits are not a new thing. We've been doing that before. And I guess the second point is that I see a lot of forecasting now, which is new, and it kind of, this is pertains what Dan said, things moving very quickly. So people are trying to a little bit anticipate where the thing is going, especially with regards to dual use of models and adversarial capabilities. So just projecting from the rate things have been advancing and trying to preempt a little bit where the adversaries are going to be 6 months from now. So those two things I consider very interesting. I don't have a definitive answer for either, but
so most of the audience here, you guys come from an AppSec environment, right? How many of you come from AI security background rather than AppSec? A couple of people, but mostly more people AppSec. So what would be your advice, someone who comes from that? And Josh, I'll start with you. You said we already have known mitigations, defenses, approaches to that. So when you have this crowd of experienced and talented people, that they have all this fire hose of scare stories about AI, how would we go about educating the community? Where do we start?
It's interesting you bring that up, John, because I was going to grab the mic off of Vaz and say we haven't mentioned trying to stop all this hype. I think that there's lots of like stories out there of these things are going to turn into Terminator, and it's all kind of, do you know what I mean? It's going to turn into a mess. I think it's also really key for people to remember that an AI system, the model part of that system is probably like 10%. And everything else is software, right? There's access control, there's data moving around, there's bits and pieces. So all of the knowledge that you guys already know, you can apply to it and just go, okay, what's the inputs and the outputs from this thing? Does it have authorization to access this data? What data classification is this stuff? Do you know what I mean? So all of that stuff applies. I think one thing that probably will help quite a lot is, so as I said, I didn't come from an AI background and spent some time looking at it. And I think when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh man, this is so confusing. Like it's all like, it's impenetrable. But when you actually start kind of digging into it, it's actually not that, like, it's not that difficult to learn. It takes some time. But I think like even like doing like something like a basic kind of machine learning course, just to understand the terminology that people are talking about, would help to ask some kind of like intelligent questions to some of the AI teams that you work with. I don't know if Dan might have some interesting.
Yeah, I think in terms of learning, there's always something new to learn, right? I think Microsoft always has this emphasis on a growth mindset, which is something that I actually really believe that is important regardless of who I work for. But yeah, we have this. We've also constructed trainings that are now available, playbooks for red teaming and how we might go about them, and using the tools that we have from our pirate libraries. I think these are good ways to sort of play around with, because what we don't see is that sort of you see the tip of the iceberg in some sense. Like underneath, when we're red teaming a foundational model, it's very different from when we're red teaming a product, when you have to think about the sort of architecture, like what's important, how are you plugging into the user and how they're integrating. And so every time we do this, we can't share that like knowledge, all of that knowledge and our findings publicly, but what we can do is give tooling, and our tooling is reflected by what we've seen and what we find our risks. And each of those playbooks and notebooks come from something that we've seen internally, and only that way can we sort of give back, so that people can start to learn and see what it means to really get your hands dirty, let's say, on these kind of emerging trends and models. That's
just a quick point. I've seen I don't know, I'm often kind of contrarian to both approaches or both extremes. So what happens is, on the one side, you have the, let's say, AI safety enthusiast that start talking to you about AI cyber risks and all the things that could go wrong. And yeah, I don't fully follow, as in, yeah, there are risks, but I think we can manage and we're on top of it, so things are fine. And then on the other side, you have the person that maybe have been doing security for a long time, and they fall really on the other extreme, where they're like, well, I don't understand this AI thing or machine learning thing, I'll just ignore it. I don't think that's also sensible. Probably some kind of a balanced approach is going to go a much longer way, which is, if I understood correctly, what Josh and Dan were saying.
If I summarize then what I've heard from you, and then I'll turn the table and ask you to be the panel. I'll ask you some questions. There is a lot of hype around AI, so much fire hose of stories, of scare stories, but there is also, some real concerns, some real issues. We shouldn't play that down. It's just we need to have that knowledge of what the risks are and what the threats are, so that we can knowledgeably apply that. And what I heard from you guys is start with the basics. Security, hygiene. It doesn't matter how complicated your agent is. There is no escape that you need to have good access permissions. And then what I've heard, I think, is try to understand a little bit the beast more. So this is where I come back to you and say, how many of you have used a Jupyter Notebook, for instance? Jupyter Notebook, or okay, so that's good. So does anyone want to kind of talk about their transition from traditional cyber to kind of playing a little bit with AI security? Any questions around that, of how do we start this journey of understanding AI security? Or any questions to the panel? I'm just trying to make it interactive. See, we had there are new threats. There is hype. We need to understand. We need to start playing with some of those artifacts. I'm interested also in your questions and your experiences. There you go. And if you can just say your name and.
Hello, my name is Andreas. I'm an AI engineer. I don't have experience in security, but I wanted to ask you, are there any tools, and do the existing frameworks like Agentic AI, LangChain, and everything else offer any tooling that we could use from our side of building the actual application? And if there are no tools, what is the way to create them ourselves for our apps?
Okay. So I'll leave the tools to Dan, because Microsoft definitely have a very good tool that's out there. That there is other tools as well. I think about one of the things though that we had a chat in our kind of pre-panel kind of sync thing was that there still is a need for tools though. So I think one of the key things, which is kind of part of the OWASP stuff, is if we can kind of get this kind of top 10 taxonomy and get some information, pull people's knowledge, there's a hope that people will then start going, oh, I can make a tool for memory poisoning. Do you know what I mean? To detect memory poisoning, because it's kind of like a bit better understood. I think at the moment you've got lots of tools for assessing LLMs, because that's kind of the big thing at the moment. But there are kind of periphery things that I think you'll start seeing as the kind of whole area matures a bit more. You'll see a tool for memory poisoning, for example. You'll see a tool for data provenance. So, and all this stuff will kind of crop up. But I'll pass over to Dan to chat about LLM stuff.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. This is a good question. And I think I have like two different types of tooling in my mind. The first is a tool like what we have in the AI Red team called Pirate, which is a Python risk identification toolkit, which essentially helps you automate a bunch of red team kind of attacks. And sort of maybe there's an attack that came up in the research literature like Crescendo, and what you can do is take another language model. It could be the same model, but you want to make sure that it has like the ability to really probe your model. and let the language models interact with each other. And it has an objective, and that objective comes from whatever it is that you want to kind of probe on. And this way you can, orchestrate yourself an attack and get some statistics on it, and kind of keep track of how does your model bode in comparison to other models with the same judge, with the same sort of setup. So that's kind of like the first sort of probing and how you can go about doing red teaming via tooling. The other thing is, you mentioned plugging into sort of agents. I love LangChain, right? I think this is a good way for us to just like, quickly move, like get some proof of concepts in. If I want to show like an attack and a vulnerability, then I can run an experiment. I can point to memory. I can appeal to Lang graph as well and set up multi-agent systems. And I think it's really important that we have this sort of common tool there for people to communicate to. So then we can go and speak to stakeholders and say, this is how we've showcased. And there, I don't think there is necessarily a specific tool. It comes back a little bit to the architecture. You need to re-implement something. If you want to implement a Teams, to mock like a Teams interaction or Slack or email, then you sort of need to build that up from scratch. And so it would be really nice to have a tool that you could kind of have that all done for you for free, I guess. And the other thing, which goes back to kind of bringing in, there's another tool coming out that came out of Cambridge recently from Azure Research, called Fides. There's also a Google version called Camel, so I don't want to be biased to Microsoft, but the point is that there are tools that exist that can help control via integrity labels where the data is coming from and whether you want to be inserting that into the model at runtime. So like, if a tool is being called, you want to add a parameter in it, can we trust that? If we can't, then just don't use it. And so, yeah, there are tools for that as well. So I think the space is looking good, right, to Vaz's point. But as we evolve, I think we really need to be like, as a community, building on that and growing those tools. Do you have anything else to add?
I don't have anything to say about specific tools. I actually have a follow-up question. So, okay, say we have tools that, or we will in the future, that do a good job covering what's out there. How do you make this part of your workflow? As in, maybe we can ground this down to a specific use case, right? Say you want to develop a LangChain pipeline or whatever, a pipeline to process medical data for end users or like a select group. Where do you start with tools? How do you audit? How do you make it part of what you would do anyway, right? But now specific to machine learning. Anyone willing to?
I think so my answer is going to be the typical politician answer. Don't know. I think it goes back to the kind of. I think as the area matures, we'll have more of these use cases out there. We'll have more standardized things, because at the moment, particularly if you read any of the kind of research in this space, it's all described differently. The threat models are different. The attacker assumptions are different. The deployment scenarios, everything's different. So I think as we start kind of converging on kind of a shared kind of language to talk about it, I'd hope that we kind of get to a point where we can actually kind of give a solid answer for Faz's question.
Okay, yeah. Also, I just wanted to add that, yeah, I think, like you said, like the model is just a small part of an entire system, right? And if you just think of the model being there, you'll have sort of your sockets, right, where it's plugged into the system. And I think capturing the vulnerabilities from the probabilistic side from the model and how that can interact is also really key. So I think if you can run tests like through, tools like Pirate or any other tool that you want to sort of probe, especially if you have a relative difference in how that performed through previous attacks in different models or previous versions, then you can sort of, similar to integration tests or like kind of like end-to-end pipelines, have something that, you have some metrics that you're okay with to continue before you actually go into deployment. I think that's one thing I can suggest, but each role, right, engineer, like LLM engineer or security engineer or architect, I mean, they all have different flavors of what they want to see. So yeah, I think the answer also depends on who you're talking to, right?
That's what we had for the panel. Oh, sorry, you have a question, but you have to be quick because we're going to join the global call in a few minutes. But
thanks. Hi, I'm Abhishek. I'm the founder of a security company called Prefree. So how do you think the attack surface increasing with this new AI tooling, and are we capable enough to handle this like kind of attack surface, and what's like kind of expanding the way it's expanding?
Sorry, is the question, how does the automated tooling change how we, like the vulnerabilities and that we're experiencing? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the, like for example, with Pirate again, like the example of having a model that can probe some other model, I think there's a certain amount that model can achieve, right? And if we're picking a model from a shopping list of, OpenAI models or something on Azure, they've all been sort of trained to be quite safe anyway. So I think that there is a limit there in what it can do. I think what would be really interesting is giving the capability of these models to be a bit more adversarial and to probe a bit more. We wouldn't want to give access to the public for such a model, right? But I think that can be an interesting direction, right?
It's not a direct answer, but I think most of the risk comes from the autonomy aspect of things, as in, well, for the first time, you have something that's not scripted by a human that makes decisions. I think up until now, we had scripts doing that, but it was all heuristics and like very easy to understand, or relatively easy to understand conditions. If this happens, then do that. So now you have something else that's not as, let's say, explicit, making decisions. And I wonder if this actually makes the attack surface much harder to scope.
This will be really quick, John. I think one thing that is worth looking at as well as an example is going back to the thing of like, don't forget kind of old money cybersecurity. Is DeepSeek was a really good example of it. They left their entire database open. That's like a traditional security problem that's part of an AI system. So I think there is almost the inverse. People focus AI security and then forget the other the other stuff. So yeah.
And I think that's an important point there. I think we must not be either or.